want me to on my video or is it okay?
Ma'am, if you want to check the technical side from
Yeah,
your side,
maybe
yes, you can.
I'll on the video and say hi, and then I will anyway be sharing PPTs. So
We'll start the session within minutes now.
yeah, sure.
A warm good afternoon to all the participants present here. On behalf of the management, our administrator, Reverend Sister Dr. M. Baby, our principal, Dr. R. Rubin, I welcome all the participants for the Day 2 virtual FTP on research methodology, writing content for thesis, organized by the Department of Business Administration along with the IQAC of St. Joseph's College, Arts and Science, Chennai. As the quote says, whatever you do, do in the name of the Lord. I invite our convener, Mrs. M. Christina, Head Department of Business Administration, to lead us in prayer.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Gracious, loving Father, we thank you very much. You have added one more day in our life. Thank you for all your blessings you are pouring upon us each and every day. We bless our administrative system, our principal, and our college head of the department, faculty members, and all the participants, those who are gathered here. We acknowledge that we need your wisdom and insight. We need your presence among us. Bless our today's resource person so that she may share the knowledge in the field of expertise. Bless every one of them. Seek us what is best for all. Let everything has to be glorify your name. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, ma'am. Now it's time to introduce our resource person for the day. I request Mr. Mahesh G, Assistant Professor, Department of Business Administration, to introduce the resource person.
Good afternoon to one of the present here. It's my immense pleasure to introduce our esteemed resource person for today's Faculty Development Program Day 2, Dr. P. Sutha, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce at Agurchand Manmull Jain College, where she had been specialized in commerce. She has 21 years of teaching experience, All India 19th rank in ICWA Intermediate Examination. With a robust background, she completed her doctorate in Ethiraj College, which is affiliated to University of Madras. Her tremendous information brings a wealth of knowledge and practical insights to our session. She published and presented more journals in national as well as international conferences. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Having said this, let's all move to the session of the day. Now, Dr. Sudha, ma'am, you can
Yes,
carry.
ma'am.
Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
I will begin by thanking St. Joseph College management, principal, the Department of BBA, the department staff, in particular Professor Mahesh, for having me in the FEP, and uh, I will also, tell more about Professor Mahesh towards the end of the session. So let us straight away begin with the session. This is day 2, and I'm given the topic research design and questionnaire design. So let me make a presentation. At the end of the presentation, we have a Q&A. So if you have questions regarding this topic, participants can ask. So I think I'll go ahead with the session. I hope my audio is clear, ma'am. Audio is clear?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay, so I will share my screen. I have a presentation for me. Yeah. So is my screen visible to all of you?
Yes, ma'am.
So we get started. Okay, so I think the organizer is sharing the screen, so let us wait for a minute or two and then we will get started. So I hope all of you would have had an enriching session yesterday. And today is day 2 in this FTP. First of all, I would like to congratulate the BBA department of St.Joseph for organizing this faculty development program, and the way in which the topics are structured is excellent. So today is day 2, and we're going to talk about research design and questionnaire design. Okay. So what I'll do is the first part of the session would contribute to research design, and in the second part we will concentrate on questionnaire design. Okay. So what basically is research design? Research design, see, yesterday I think you got an introduction to what is research. Okay. And today we are going to talk about research design. I think yesterday was introduction to research. Then there was the resource person would have elaborated on review of literature and how to identify variables. Okay, so it's a nice way to start with research design on day 2. Yes, yes. Can I continue? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay. So a research design is basically a blueprint or a plan, okay, a detailed plan which will tell you how to go about doing your research. Okay, it is a very important step, because when you plan something well, obviously it's going to happen. It will be once you implement your plan also well, it's going to happen in a really successful manner. Okay, so research design is very very important. It is a blueprint, or we can say it's a roadmap, or it's a systematic step by step procedure to formulate your research and to go about it. Okay, so can we go on to the second slide? Yeah. So when we talk about research design, how should your research design be? Okay. There are certain aspects that you have to keep in mind while you are planning your entire research program. The first and foremost is neutrality. Okay, so you have to be neutral. See, I will take examples from the research that I have done, basically my PhD, because I've done it for like 6+ years. So I will give quote examples from my own experiences in doing my PhD. So the first characteristic of your research design is neutrality. For example, my PhD was in investor behavior and investment biases. Okay, it was in behavioral finance, and basically investor biases and investor behavior. So when we talk about investor behavior, investor biases, you would have read a lot of articles. Okay, you would have read a lot of literature on it. You may have certain ideas. Okay, but when you're formulating your research design, when you're giving your objectives and all, you have to take a neutral standpoint. You should not, for example, if my study is on investment biases, I shouldn't think that investors are biased. They may be biased, they may be emotional, there may be evidence, there may be literature on all that, but when I am starting my research work, I have to have a neutral approach. Okay, so because when you are neutral, you should be as a researcher unbiased. That is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so that is very very important. You should, any research, supposing you are doing something on marketing, okay, on green marketing, you should not. You may have a viewpoint, okay, but you should not superimpose your viewpoint on your research design. You have to start with a neutral mindset and you have to proceed with your research. So that neutrality is very important. Second, your research design has to be reliable. Okay, whatever, I mean, we're going to look into how to create a research design and all that. So whatever plan you are creating, whatever procedures you are giving in your research design, it has to be reliable in the sense it has to give you good results. Okay, so this is the basic reason why we start with the review of literature and then we come into your own research process. Okay, so reliability is very important. Third important aspect is generalization. Okay, now research, you create a research design for a particular population. Okay, your research design, if somebody wants to adopt it, it should be adaptable. Okay, it should be general and it should be adaptable for similar studies with other populations or in other geographical areas. Okay, so generalization is important. And flexibility. Okay, your research design has to be flexible in nature, because as you proceed with your research, some of you may be already doing your research, so as you proceed in your research, you will come to understand that you may have to make certain changes. Okay, some things when you start you will have it in your research, but as you proceed you may understand it's not feasible, it's not workable, so you may have to modify or you may have to make certain changes to your research. So you should allow some amount of flexibility in your entire research design. Okay, so it shouldn't be too rigid, because then it gets very difficult for you to proceed with your work. So some amount of flexibility has to be allowed. Then most importantly, it has to be robust and scientific in nature. Okay, so that's why we say it's a systematic procedure, so it has to be scientific. You can understand in the next slides how to create a research design, wherein you will understand it's a scientific way of creating. Okay, so these are basic things that you need to keep in mind. Now, previous slide please, previous one. Yeah, these are basic things that we have to keep in mind while you're formulating your research design. So go with a neutral mindset, whatever be your topic. If you have, like for example, I took a topic on investor behavior and investment biases, like I told you, but I had to go with a neutral mindset. I do not know anything about the investors, the Indian investors that I'm going to study. It's only through my research I'm going to know about their behavior, attitude, and all of that. Okay, so go with a neutral mindset. Make sure your design is, research design is reliable in the sense dependable. Make sure your research design can be replicated and generalized. Okay, the findings could be generalized. Okay, have some amount of flexibility in your research design, because you never know how things are going to proceed. And most importantly, it has to be scientific in nature. Okay, so next slide. So we understood what was research design. It is basically a plan that you are creating to go through your research process. Okay, and we also understood what are the basic factors that you need to keep in mind while you're formulating your research design. So you have to have a neutral mindset. You should allow some amount of flexibility. Your research design should be reliable, so on. Okay. So next we are going to look into different types of research designs. Okay. So there are many authors who give you many types, but broadly I have brought some popular types of research design in this particular slide. Okay. So there are like basically a research design can either be qualitative or quantitative. Now, what is qualitative research design? Qualitative research design is when you want to study something which is not in numerical terms. Okay. For example, see, some types of qualitative research designs like case study and ethnography. Okay. Now, case study is you could take a particular organization and you could study about the way in which the organization is functioning. Okay. For example, when I was in my PG, we were asked to do a project. Most of you might be doing PG projects. That time I took a particular hospital. There is Sundram Medical Foundation in Ananagar, which many of you might know. So I wanted to study a non-profit organization, a hospital. Okay. So I took Sundram Medical Foundation. I have, and I studied. So when you take one particular organization, or even one person, okay, or even one particular event, and when you do an in-depth study, that is called as a case study. Okay, so it depends on what you would like to do. Okay, so case study is when you want to take one organization or one person or any one event, and when you want to study in detail, okay, then you call it as a case study. Then under qualitative research design, there is also another type which is called as ethnography. Ethnography is when you want to study certain group of people or certain certain cultures or certain population. Then you call it as ethnography. So here, basically, you numbers are not involved. Okay, you're trying to look into the attitude or behavior or the functioning of a particular organization or a person or a group of people without involving numericals. Okay, so that kind of study you call it as a qualitative study. The other type of study is quantitative study, for which we will formulate naturally a quantitative research design. Now, what is a quantitative study? Now, same attitude, behavior, etc. You could even quantify and study, convert it into numericals, and then you could study. Okay, so that is basically called as a quantitative research study. Okay, so under quantitative you have three types which are very popular. One is descriptive, the other is correlational, and the third one is experimental. Okay, now what is first descriptive? Descriptive is basically you do not look into any cause effect relationships, or you do not look into any association. You just want to understand a set of population. Okay, so then that kind of a study you call it as a descriptive study. For example, let us assume that a particular company wants to capture a new market. Okay, so they want to know what kind of consumers exist in that market. For example, they would want to know what is the age group of people who are there, the gender, are there more men, more women? Okay, what is the level of income that they earn? Okay, what is the educational qualification? Okay, so these kind of things when you want to know, okay, you call it as a descriptive study. Okay, so you can quantify it and you can study a particular population. Okay, the other type of quantitative study is correlational in nature. Okay, what is a correlational study? Correlational study is you study the subject or the respondent only once. Okay, and correlational study is when you want to establish an association, okay, between, you must have learned about variables yesterday, so I will use that term. So when you want to establish an association, okay, between two people, or between two variables rather, okay, then you call that as a correlational study. For example, you want to know how much is the income earned by a group of people and how is their spending pattern. Okay, so you're trying to establish some kind of relationship. Okay, then that becomes a correlational study. Okay, then the third popular type of quantitative study is experimental in nature. In an experimental study, what happens is a subject is studied twice. Okay, they are studied before a certain process is given to them, and they are studied after the process has taken place. For example, classic example which you might be knowing is, let's say there is a training program. Okay, so you want to know how effective the training program is on the trainees. Okay, so what you do is you study them before the training program. Okay, and you have certain scores about the trainees, then you give them the training program, and then you study them after the training program, and then you get certain scores about the trainees, compare the two, then that becomes experimental. Similarly, in sciences, experimental studies are mostly done by done in natural and applied sciences. Okay, so when you want there is a particular thing, you add something to it, you go that it goes through a process, and then there is an end result. So you compare what was before the process and what is after the process, then such a study you call it as an experimental study. Okay, so quantitative study basically involves numbers or numericals. Okay, even qualitative data, you try to convert it into numbers or quantitative data, and you study. It is broadly of three types. One is descriptive. Descriptive is you just try to understand the population, that's all. Okay, so you want to know what is their age group, you want to know what is their level of income, you want to know what is their educational qualification. So that is basically descriptive study. Okay. In correlational, you go one step further and you try to study the relationship between two or more variables. Then it becomes correlational. Experimental is you study the subject twice. Okay, because you have to impose some kind of a process over the subject. Okay, so you study them before the process, then you give them the process, and then you study them after the process and compare the results. Then it becomes experimental study. Okay, so basically it depends on what is your research, what is your research area, what do you want to research on. So you could either go in for a qualitative research design, or you could go in for a quantitative research design. See, like I told you, when I was doing my post graduation, I studied, I wanted to know how a hospital, a non-profit organization like a hospital works. Okay, so that was a case study. It was more qualitative in nature. Okay, but later when I did a PhD, I did it on investment behavior and investment biases. That was a quantitative study. I tried to establish relationships between when people are biased, how is their buying behavior, how do they invest. Okay, how do they buy shares or how do they invest. So that came under quantitative study. So depending on what is your research topic, what is your research problem, you can accordingly choose a research design. Okay, so can we go to the next slide please? Yes. So we understood what is a research design. Basically, it's nothing but a plan to do your research. Then we understood what are all the characteristics you have to keep in mind while you're formulating your research design. Okay, so basically you should be neutral. You should have a neutral approach. You should not be biased. Okay, and you should allow flexibility. Your research design has to be reliable. It should be, I mean, you should be able to generalize, and all of those we saw. Then we saw types of research design. You can either go in for a qualitative research design, or you could go in for a quantitative research design, depending on your topic and your research problem. Okay, now next comes the most important thing, which we are going to also look into in detail: how to create a research design. Okay, so this is very important, because once you create your research design very well, okay, 80% of your work is done. Okay, because you have a blueprint or a plan on hand. Okay, and you can go by it and complete your entire research process. Okay, so what are the steps involved? The first step is identify the research problem. Okay, the second step is determine your research objectives. Okay, the third step is sampling. Okay, the fourth step is data collection. The next one is analysis, findings, and suggesting suitable action. Okay, so now one by one we will discuss these steps in greater detail. Okay, so the first step is identifying your research problem. So can we go to the next slide please? Can we go to the next slide? Yes. So how do you identify a research problem? It all starts with your review of literature. That is why I told you the way in which this FDP is designed is very good, because yesterday on day one, we all got, I mean, your participants would have got introduced to what is research, and the resource person would have spoken about how to do your review of literature. Okay, so your research problem or your research gap is identified when you do your review of literature very well. Okay, so that is a very, very important aspect. Okay, so how do you start a research? Supposing, see, when I wanted to do my PhD, I was thinking on what topic can I do. So I was very interested in finance. So I thought I'll do something in finance. Okay. So okay, finance is a very vast area. There is corporate finance. Then you could study about individual investors, institutional investors, FIIs. It's a vast area. Okay. So okay, finance, that is a broad area. Next, slightly narrow down. So in finance, I thought I will do a study in behavioral finance, because behavioral finance, at that point in time in India, it was not very well researched. So I thought I will do a study in behavioral finance. So slightly narrowed down. So once I decided I will do something in behavioral finance, what did I do? I started reading articles and research papers on behavioral finance. Okay, so the more you read, the better it is, because two reasons: one, you will understand your topic very well, and two, you will be able to identify research gaps. Okay, so from finance, I decided behavioral finance. Then when you start reading, yesterday resource person must have told you, when you start with your review of literature, one suggestion, say, because practically what we have learned while we were doing our research, I thought I'll share it with you. One suggestion that I would like to give would be, when you start reading research papers, especially papers from abroad, okay, normally the methodology part may slightly bog you down. Okay, uh, don't worry, because when you start, it's going to be like that. Okay, so what I would suggest is, you're taking a paper to read. First thing, you read the abstract. Okay, so you will get to know what the researcher is trying to do. Okay, read the abstract. Then read the introduction. Okay, then there'll be a review of literature for that paper. You could go through it, go through the objectives, the purpose. Okay, methodology part, don't worry too much. Okay, and then you could go to scope for further research and conclusion. Okay, methodology, if you can understand and read, very good. But if you think it's putting you down, you're not able to, don't worry. Okay, so you can, when you review literature, you can do this. Okay, read the abstract, read the introduction, know the objectives, then maybe don't look too much into the methodology, go to scope of literature, I mean scope of further research, and go to the conclusion. So you will have an idea what this person has researched about, okay, what he studied. Okay, so like this, when you do your review of literature, you will be able to identify research gaps. Okay, can we have the slide? I think I'm not able to see. Yeah, so you'll be able to identify the research gaps. I'm not seeing the slide, but I don't know if other participants are able to see. So I will also tell you how to identify research gaps in, in certain easier ways. Okay, so there I have in my slide, is the slide visible for the participants? Because sometimes,
Ma'am, just one second. Just
no
one
problem,
second,
no
ma'am.
problem. I'm
We
just
are
asking.
again presenting the slide.
I have an idea of what I'm talking, but I want the participants to look into the slide so that they will know where I'm talking.
Just one second.
No
We
problem.
are presenting the slide.
Yeah, it's coming now. So, you do your review of literature basically to identify research gaps. Okay, so I will tell you how to easily identify research gaps. Actually, there are ways to identify research gaps. These 3 points come under that. Okay, so 3 points are given. One is insufficient studies. Okay, for example, I said I had done my PhD in behavioral finance. Okay, so I started reading papers on that. As I read papers, I understood in India they were, especially when I was doing, I think I started my work in 2009. Okay, in India there were very few studies on behavioral finance. Okay, so there were insufficient studies. So when there are insufficient studies in your area, in your geographical area like India, okay, we have very less Indian studies. That is, I mean, that could be a good reason why you should, take that topic. So that is there you have identified a gap. Okay, so number one, insufficient studies. Number two, there are certain topics where there could be a lack of understanding. Okay, for example, results may be there could be theories which are controversial, or there could be results which are contradicting. For example, same study, one researcher may have got a particular result, another researcher would have got an entirely different result. So you would like to know why. Okay, same topic, two people are studying, one gets one kind of a result, another person gets entirely another kind of result. For example, let us say I am studying something on in finance. I will give you an example. Let us say I am studying something on what happens when shares are included in the index of a stock market. Okay, so one person says when shares are included there is no reaction, but another researcher studies the same thing in his own geographical area, and he says there is reaction when shares are included in the index. So same topic, two researchers have studied and they have got contradicting results. Okay, so you want to know why. Okay, so when there is lack of understanding in a particular area or in a particular topic, that also will be a good research gap for you to take up in your own work. Okay, then third way to identify is limitations in previous research. Always that's why I told you, when you do your review of literature, you read the introduction, you read the objectives, okay, then methodology maybe you can skip, and then very importantly you read scope for further research and what are the limitations, because that will give you an idea what you can do. So whatever this researcher has not done, okay, he will put it in the scope, or whatever is a limitation for this researcher, you can try to overcome that limitation in your own research. Okay, so these are three ways to identify a research gap. So the first is find out if there are enough. Supposing some topic is done research too much in India, I don't think you should also take the same topic and work on it. Okay, so first identify whether there are insufficient studies in that area. So that will be a good reason why you have to take up that research problem. Okay, second, there are certain areas or there are certain topics where there is not enough understanding, or there are controversial results, or there are contradicting results between two studies, then you can try and understand why the controversy. Okay, so lack of understanding of certain topics also will be a good reason why you have to research. And third, look into the limitations of the limitations and the scope for further research in the papers that you are studying. That will also give you a research problem which you can work on. So these are three ways in which, there are many ways in which you can identify research gap, but these are three important ways in which you could identify a gap. So like I said, I wanted to do my research in behavioral finance. Okay, so when I was reading, most of the papers, okay, most of the papers were only papers from abroad, especially in the developed markets. Okay, US, most of the papers were from the US. So I understood that the Indian markets, the Indian investors, their biases were not studied enough. Okay, so that was one reason why I took investor behavior and investment biases at that point in time. Okay, like I said, I started my work in 2009. So when you have insufficient studies, okay, that could be a reason. So lack of understanding could be a reason, or limitations in previous research could be a reason why you have to take up that problem and you have to study. Okay, so the first step in your research design is to identify the research gap. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, now you have identified a research gap. Now I have decided that my study is going to be on investor behavior and investment biases. Decided. Okay. Now what is the next thing? The next thing is framing research objectives. Very, very important. Okay. So in order to frame research objective, you can adopt this SMART approach. Okay, here SMART is an acronym which I have expanded there, so you can just go through it. I'll have some water. So did you go through SMART? So you can have a SMART approach in designing your research objective. So what is this SMART? S stands for specific. Okay, so the objectives that you are formulating for your research has to be specific in nature. Okay, now broadly I have decided I am going to study on investment behavior and investment biases. In investment behavior and investment biases, what am I going to study? Okay, for example, as I was reading literature, I understood that there are certain rules of thumb that people follow because of their emotional pattern while investing. Okay, mostly I can tell you some example. Mostly people who are investing in the stock market are found to be overconfident. okay, and they anchor to previous prices, okay. So like this, there are certain emotional trigger points that makes a person invest or take an emotional stand rather than analyzing the market and investing, okay. So I wanted to study these emotional triggers like overconfidence, anchoring, loss aversion, risk averse behavior, okay. So these kind of like that I took some 7 or 8 emotional triggers to study, okay. So you have to now, once you've identified the gap, you have to now while framing your objective, make it more specific, okay. So you have to make it more specific. Then second important aspect is M stands for measurable. Your Most of us see, especially we do research for academic purposes. You want to do your PhD, or you want to write a paper for a journal, okay. So most of us do research for academic purposes, and I think most of us belong to the commerce management stream, okay. Social sciences research, okay. So what we do is we try to quantify the data. Most of us go in only for a quantitative research design, okay. So when we say quantitative research design, you have to frame your objectives in such a way that it is measurable. For example, if I want to know whether investors are overconfident, okay, there should be a way in which I can measure overconfidence. Okay, so your objectives have to be numerically measurable, because many of us go in only for a quantitative research design. Then third important aspect, your objectives have to be achievable. Very important. Sometimes we become very idealistic and we frame objectives which we cannot achieve. Okay, so it should not be. You have to be more practical. Okay, when you're doing a research, so make sure your objectives are achievable in nature, okay. Then next aspect is you should be able to replicate. You in the sense, see, we all read previous research papers and sometimes we take it as a base paper and we try to work on it. So what we basically do is we try to replicate whatever that researcher has done in our own scenario, in our own population, okay. So same way you are doing a research today, somebody may try to replicate it for their own population, okay. So your objectives should be framed in such a way that somebody could replicate it and work on it with some other population, okay. Then very very important, because like I said, we all do for academic purposes. Even if you do a PhD, you have to, there is a time frame, okay. You have to complete your PhD within a specific time. You cannot go on extending. Similarly, when you're writing a paper for a conference or for a journal, there is a time, there is a deadline by which you have to complete. So you have to frame your objective in such a way that you are able to study your objective and write your paper or your thesis within the particular time limit, okay. So you have to also stick to the time limit. So this is a smart move in framing your research objectives. So make sure your objective is specific, make sure your objective is measurable, make sure it's achievable, make sure other researchers can also replicate your objectives and your research design in their own population and in their own area, and make sure you stick to the time limit, okay. So these are some aspects that you have to keep in mind while you're framing your research objective. Next slide please. Yes, so once you identify a research problem or a gap, I told you how to identify a research problem or a gap. Okay, 3 ways I told you. One is when there are insufficient studies. Two, when there is lack of understanding in a particular topic. Okay, these are all reasons why there is a research gap which you could fill. Okay, so identify the research gap, then frame your objectives, okay. So in framing your objectives, you have the smart approach that we discussed, okay. Now once your objectives are framed, okay, next is sampling. Now most of us go in only for a sampling study, because we can't study the entire population, okay. It's practically impossible to study the entire population. For example, I wanted to study Indian investors, okay. I cannot possibly study all the Indian investors, so I have to choose a few and study, okay. So which means I have to take a sample of Indian investors and study them, okay. So how do you decide on the sample? So sampling becomes very important. Now, when you talk about sampling, theoretically you must be knowing, but it's always nice to brush through some, conceptual and theoretical aspects. So sampling, there are two types of sampling: probability and non-probability. Okay. So in probability sampling, why do we call it? You should have all done probability in statistics. Okay. So why do you call this probability sampling? Because it is because every what can I say, person in the population, or every subject in the population has an equal chance of appearing in the sample. Okay, so then you call it as a probability sample. Non-probability is not like that. Okay, probability sampling is more scientific in nature because every subject has a fair chance of appearing in the sample, so it's more scientific in nature. We should always, especially when you do research at a higher level, like your PhD, or when you're writing papers for UGC care journals and Scopus journals and all, definitely go in only for probability sampling. Okay, non-probability sampling is not every subject has an equal chance of appearing. In certain cases, non-probability sampling also comes handy or is of great help. So let me tell you what are the types of non-probability sampling, and then I will move on to probability. So non-probability is basically dependent on the researcher. Okay, so I will do what is right for me. Okay, there is no scientific basis for what I am doing. There is no scientific basis for choosing the subjects or the units in the sample. Okay, so non-probability, the first thing is convenience sampling. Many of us, when we do research at a small level, especially when UG students are doing and all, they go in for convenience sampling. Supposing somebody wants to study about iPhones, okay, the buying behavior with respect to iPhones. It's done at a small level. Means they will just see who are all their friends, neighbors, or relatives who are having iPhones. They will give the questionnaire or whatever to them, and they will try to collect some responses, and they'll study it. So this is called as convenience sampling. Another one is non-probability. The next type is judgmental sampling. Judgmental sampling is, it's based on the researcher's judgment. Okay, for example, we are all, most of us might be professors and teachers. Okay, so sometimes let's say we have a class of 80 students. Now we want to select some 20 students for a particular program. So what you do is you have a judgment. Okay, these students are good. Okay, so let us select these students. So you go based on your judgment. Okay, then quota sampling. Quota sampling is you divide the entire population into smaller groups, and from each group you choose based on your judgment again. Okay, so that is quota sampling. Then the next one is snowball sampling. Non-probability again. What is snowball sampling? Snowball sampling is, I choose a few people and I ask the few people to choose more people for my research. Okay, then that is called as snowball sampling. Okay, for example, I am doing a study on iPhones. Okay, buying behavior with respect to iPhones. So I know 5 people who are using iPhones. So I choose these 5 people and I ask these 5 people. Okay, and I ask these 5 people to choose more people for my study. Then that becomes snowball sampling. So these are all non-probability sampling techniques. Okay, so convenience sampling, judgment sampling, quota sampling, and snowball sampling. Somebody is raising their hand. Miss Fatima S, does she have a question? If you want to take questions right now, or should we take it later?
Fatima ma'am, is there
Fatima
any
ma'am?
query you have to ask?
Yeah, because Fatima S has raised a hand, it says. So
Ma'am, any doubts you can kindly ask in the Q&A session.
okay, fine. Okay, then let me continue. Okay. Okay. So then this is probability, non-probability. Then let's move on to probability sampling. Probability sampling, I said, is more scientific because every subject in the population has a fair chance of appearing in the has a fair chance of appearing in the sample. Okay, so you have simple random sampling. Simple random sampling is where you need to it is basically, the name itself suggests to you, it is random. Okay, so if there are, let's say there are 100 people sitting. Okay, I don't have any judgment, I do not know about these people. Okay, I want 20 people, I randomly choose 20 people. Okay, then it becomes simple random sampling. Okay, so simple random sampling, every, see, when there are 100 people, all the 100 people have an equal chance of appearing in the sample. We don't know who's going to be chosen. Okay, I do not have any idea or any judgment about the 100 people who are sitting, so I just go and I randomly pick 20 people. Okay, then it becomes simple random sampling. Okay, then you have systematic sampling. Systematic sampling is, like, for example, I decide to choose every fifth person. I start with a person and then I decide to choose every fifth person from that person, or every 10th person from that person. Okay, then that is called as systematic sampling. Okay, so this is also slightly random in the sense that we don't know who's the first person who's going to be chosen, because I said I will randomly choose the first person, and from the first person, every fifth person or every 10th person will be chosen. So that is systematic. So you know, but we don't know who's the first person who's going to be chosen. From there, every fifth or 10th person is chosen. Okay, so that way it is also random in nature. Then another type of probability sampling is stratified sampling. Okay, stratified sampling would be, yeah, stratified is you divide the entire population into groups called as strata. Okay, strata means you don't just divide them, blindly into groups. Okay, you have a particular criteria based on which you divide. For example, you have 100 people, you are dividing them based on age group. For example, less than 18 years one group, 18 to whatever 25 years is another group, then 25 to 35 years third group. So like that you divide the entire population into groups called as strata based on some criteria, not random, not just like that. You have a criteria based on which you divide them. Okay, so you divide them into strata, and from each strata you randomly choose people. Okay, so that is stratified sampling. Then the next type of probability is cluster sampling. Cluster sampling is also, you divide the population into smaller groups called as clusters. But the difference between stratified and cluster is, in stratified sampling, you have a criteria. I divide the population based on age group or income or education, some criteria. Okay, but in cluster sampling, there is no criteria. You just, for example, 10 people sitting together one group, then 10 people sitting together on the other side another group. So like that I choose, I cluster people, and from each cluster I randomly choose some people. So that is cluster sampling. So you could follow any of these techniques depending on your study. Okay, and in general, like I said, when you go for higher levels of studies, okay, I think probability sampling is more acceptable. Okay, we can never write in our PhD, see what we do, it depends, but we can never write in our PhD that sampling technique followed is convenient sampling. That may not be very well appreciated. Okay, so you should go in for probability, at least go in for simple random sampling. Okay, so this is how you decide your sample. Then can we move on to the next slide? So we have identified our research problem. We have framed our objectives using the SMART approach. Then we can't study the entire population, so we are adopting some sampling technique and deciding on the sampling technique and deciding on the sample size. I'm not going too much into sampling because I think tomorrow's program is on sampling. Okay, so I can see the research design is a very broad area, so I will give you a bird's eye view of what are the steps involved in creating a research design. Okay, so now next is, so you have got your sample. Now the next is data collection. Okay, so you want to collect data. Data again depends on what is the research problem or research objective on hand. Okay, so data, most of us know, is of two types: primary and secondary data. Primary data is data that you collect for the first time on your own. Okay, and there are many ways of doing it: questionnaire method, observation, interviews, etc. I'm not, one second, I'm getting a call from the organizer. have to stick to the time limit as well. I told you to stick, so I have to stick as well. So primary data is what you collect for the first time. Secondary data is what you get from your existing sources. Okay. In general, when you use secondary data sources, your research is well appreciated. For example, in finance, we may use stock prices, stock returns, etc., which are already available on the NSE, BSE websites and all historical data. So when you use such secondary data, your data collection is, your research is more appreciated. But primary source of data also, it depends on the study. In certain cases, you could use only a primary data source. Okay, so next is data collection, and then comes analysis. Okay, so analysis is basically systematic investigation of your research problems, okay, for which we will use statistical tools. What I want to importantly tell here is you have to use appropriate tools. Okay, this I learned through experience. Okay, when I was doing my analysis in IIT, sometimes what happens is people are so taken up by sophisticated methods. Okay, but you should see whether that sophisticated statistical tool is suiting your research purpose. Okay, your research, there is a research objective, right? So whatever statistical tool you use, that should answer your research objective, or it should answer your research problem. So you should always use an appropriate tool. Okay, you should not just go by this particular tool is very sophisticated. For example, I want to use SEM, and then you cannot superimpose it on your research objective. If there is no link between the objective and the tool that you're using, you may not get the proper findings, and your interpretations may not be right. Okay, so you have to use proper tools for analysis. Okay, then next one. Yeah. Then very importantly, so you have identified the problem, you have designed your objective, you have decided on your sampling technique, you have decided on your sample, collected data, and then you have done your analysis. Now is to communicate your findings. Okay. Now what is very, very important here is you need to summarize. Okay. So what has been done so far, you summarize, and then you give your findings. Okay, and always start from general and go to specific issues. When you frame your objective itself, you can do that. More general issues first, and then specific issues. Okay, then give your findings objective wise. For example, if you have 4 objectives, you objective 1, what is the finding, 2, what is the finding, 3, 4, like that. Okay, and very, very important, you will have an edge over other researchers. Your research will be very well appreciated provided you compare the results of your study, okay, with previous studies. Okay, that comparison, see, otherwise you're only reporting. Okay, so you should compare the results of your present study with that of your previous studies, and you should see whether, you should say whether your result is supporting previous studies, or your result is contradicting what is given in the previous studies. Okay, so if it is contradicting, then you should see, like next point I've given, if it is contradicting, you have to see why there is a contradiction. So that is where your research will be appreciated. Then very importantly, give suggestions to stakeholders, whoever is interested in your research work. Okay, then give limitations. Okay, what you have not done or what you could not do during your research process, you could always say that, and you give scope for further research. Okay, so that people who are looking into your research work, they will get an idea what they can do next. Okay, so that is communicating research findings. Okay, then some practical considerations while you have to formulate your research, like we already said, time. Okay, make sure your design is achievable within the time frame. So if you want to finish your PhD within 4 years, make sure you are able to do your PhD. Your research design is helping you to do it within 4 years. Money, okay, so there's money involved. Okay, sometimes we go in for very sophisticated data collection methods and all, where you need to spend more. So if more money is involved, try to go for sponsors. Okay, then access to data. Sometimes we formulate objectives, but it may not be difficult for us to get the data that we need to support our objectives. Okay, so in which case you have to relook into your objectives. So there'll be a lot of time waste. So make sure data is available for the study that you are undertaking. Then ethical considerations. Okay, so ethical considerations are basically when you collect data from respondents, keep their identity confidential. when you are doing a study, you mention it's only for academic purposes. So all those ethical considerations you have to keep in your research design. So this is basically about how to create a research design. Okay, then quickly I will brief you on questionnaire design. So questionnaire, you all know, is a structured instrument to get data. Normally, when do we use questionnaires? When you want to know the opinion of somebody, when you want to know the attitudes or experiences of some people, we go in for a questionnaire. Okay, and mostly see, we social sciences people or social sciences research use questionnaire more than research in scientific areas. Okay, so can we go on to the next slide? Yeah, so questionnaire, there are two types of questionnaires, open-ended and closed-ended. Open-ended questionnaires, you can gives lot of scope for the respondent to give his answers, but open-ended questionnaires are very difficult to analyze, okay. Closed-ended questionnaires is where you give a statement, okay, and you collect responses. Many of you should be knowing, I don't have that kind of time. You have this Likkert's 5-point scale wherein you could quickly get the responses and see whether a particular statement is favored, not favored, and so on. Okay, so close-ended statements are basically easy to analyze. Then next one, next slide please. Yes, this is some basic information that I want to give you on how to design, how to frame a questionnaire. Okay, first thing, language has to be clear. Many people think we should have a very rosy language to make our questionnaire look very attractive. Not like that, because anybody who's reading your questionnaire should be able to understand and respond. Okay, so you should have a questionnaire with simple words. Choice of words is very important. It should not be misleading or confusing. It should be clarity. Okay, you give a statement, it should be understood in the way in which you have given. Okay, then you have questions that will relate to your objectives. Sometimes, especially very budding researchers, their objectives and the what they have given in the questionnaire, the statements don't match. Okay, so you have to make sure your questionnaire, your questions are, or your statements are matching the objectives that you have set. Okay, do not have a very lengthy questionnaire because that will put the respondent off. Okay, then avoid leading questions. What do you mean by leading questions? Leading questions is you should not, like I said initially itself, you should have a neutral approach to your research. Okay, you should not have questions that makes the respondent a little biased or makes the respondent think in a particular way. Okay, so those kind of questions you should not have. Then order of the questions, you could have any order. Okay, I mean, like you could randomize it or you can go as per the objective. It depends on how you want your study to be organized. Okay, then this is use vignettes. This is like, see, normally this is very important, I want to tell you. Normally what happens is, when you want to study something, we ask direct questions. For example, I wanted to study on overconfidence. Okay, I cannot ask somebody, are you overconfident? Nobody would want to give, not many people would want to give negative opinion about them. So instead what you do is, you give a particular situation. Okay, and you see how they respond to the situation. Okay, based on that you deduce or you find out whether the person is overconfident or not. Okay, supposing I want to ask a person if you are loss averse or risk averse. Directly if I ask, I may not get correct responses. So I give them a situation. Okay, and how they answer to the situation or how they respond to the situation, based on that I find out whether the person is loss averse or risk averse. So that kind of a questionnaire designing is always appreciated. Okay, then very important, you have to pre-test your questionnaire. Okay, so pre-testing is first, when you design your questionnaire, you can give it to your peers and friends who are doing research in the same area. They will give you a lot of inputs. Then you can go in for a pilot study. I don't have too much time, so a pilot study will tell you about the reliability and the validity of a questionnaire. Make the changes. Some people even go for a pilot study twice. Structure your questionnaire and then you get data from your sample respondents, because once you collect the data and then if you want to change something, it becomes extremely difficult to go back to your respondents. Okay, so these are certain considerations that you have to keep in mind while framing your questionnaire. Okay, so I think with that, yeah, I'm coming to an end. So thank you very much. Quickly, if you want me to take some questions. Somebody is asking about, I saw on the chat box, purposive sampling. Purposive sampling is also somewhat similar to, I can say, judgmental or convenient sampling. Okay, you have a purpose in mind. It's non-probability mostly. You have a purpose in mind, and based on that, you select your samples. Okay, I mean your respondents. So, anything that you want me to answer quickly?
Gayatri ma'am, hope you got your answer to your query. Anybody else? This is the question
Thank you,
and
ma'am.
answer session.
Because I think
Anything?
we have to wind up by 3:10. So, I hope I gave a bird's eye view of the entire thing.
So, okay, a profound thanks to Dr. Sutha for spending her time with us and enlightening us on research design and its practical view and thesis writing. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Once again, I would like to thank St. Joseph College Management Principal, the HOD of BBA, all the staff, organizing committee, especially Professor Mahesh, who is also my student, okay, in roping me in for this faculty development program. Thank you, one and all. It was a nice opportunity. I hope the respondents got an idea about how to do their research design and how to frame their questionnaire. Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank
Requesting all the participants to on your video for a screenshot. Requesting all the participants to switch on your video for a photo. Thank you, dear participants. The feedback link has been posted in the comment box. You can fill the fill the feedback link for the e-certificate. Thank you so much. This is your moderator, Anita Shanmugam, greeting you a good day forward. Expecting your presence tomorrow also for the day 3 FTP program. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudha
Thank
ma'am.
you, Sudha ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Participants, you can fill the feedback form. Those who have filled can leave the meeting. See you all tomorrow.